Well, hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the Reforming Urban podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, Jordan Cecile, and I am joined by the one and only P. Nate, aka Pastor Nate, aka Nathaniel P. Wright. And this is going to be a little bit of a different episode this week. It just doesn't really feel appropriate to be jovial or to be laughing. It's been, you kind of have to be living under a rock to not know what's been going on. And I'm sure all of our listeners are well aware of the events of the past week. Most recently with the assassination of our brother, Charlie Kirk, also then the just race motivated murder of that young Ukrainian girl in the US as well. It's really kind of feels like a dark week, a heavy week. I don't think either of us feel right or would even be able to be joking much today. So, but we have thoughts, right? We want to be able to talk about it. We're thankful for all of our listeners and viewers who have been with us for the last 9 months as we've been doing this project of reforming nerddom. And we think that there's things that we can talk about that are related to the podcast that have really influenced why we're here right now, why in the West we are in a place where we can sadly see young people celebrating literally seconds after Charlie was shot and shortly after died, people just celebrating at the event, and how evil and twisted that is. But I think we see so much of we see this stuff in the media we consume, but then also the impact of the news on our thinking and the content that we're consuming, and how so much of this plays into the psycho who actually did that, and then how people receive that and how desensitized we are. So we just have thoughts, things that we want to talk about, and I think most importantly, just thoughts on like what do we do about it? How do we think about this stuff? Not just in light of what does the Bible say about, obviously God is sovereign over this, but what are some things that we can do as Christian men and women and children, families in light of this, so that we can actually see what we're talking about in this podcast almost every week, seeing the world being transformed into Christ's kingdom. And because it's messed up. Like this was a rough week, Nate. You're obviously pastor. How have you felt about this, and how have you? People commenting online. You're engaging with people. How's this all been for you?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because when you consume somebody's content, I feel like there's a camaraderie, there's a connection there that you feel that's sort of different than if you just watch like a movie, right? So, I've watched lots of Tom Cruise movies, and I don't feel any sort of camaraderie or connection, personal connection to Tom Cruise, because he's playing an actor, he's playing a character. It seems removed, it's produced, it's all that kind of stuff. But I do feel connected to some of the people whose content I consume, who sit and talk to a camera and help me think through things. So, I felt more connected to Charlie Kirk, even though I've never actually had a conversation with him. I know our colleague, Dr. Joe Boot, was set to sit down with him in the months to come and do an interview with TPUSA. And we had been chatting down in ReformCon in Tucson, Arizona, with some employees of TPUSA, and so we certainly feel an affinity for the ministry. But even Charlie himself, I've consumed hours of his debates. I watch how he interacts with students on campus. I've seen that thing that he did where it was like, one Trump supporter versus 20 college students or something like that. Some of those debate things that he did. And so you feel a level of connectedness to him because he's a guy who isn't, on screen playing a character. He's actually himself. He's talking to a camera. He's helping you think through issues. So all that to say, it lands differently. When Heath Ledger died, it was tragic because he was a great actor. When Charlie Kirk died, It was a totally like, I get that the circumstances are different, but I what I mean by this is there's a personal feeling of loss that many of our friends have who have consumed his content that I just don't think you get when it's just a random public figure. And of course, like as Christians, we look at what he was doing in terms of bringing God's word and God's truth to bear in a very, very dark environment. And maybe none of us knew exactly how dark until this happened because obviously we knew that students were getting radicalized on campus. We've seen guys like Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and our own Joe Boot or Doug Wilson get chased off university campuses, not a place where free speech is welcome anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But to see this happen, like to see a guy set up a debate booth, an apologetics table to answer students' questions, to bring the word of God to bear on the questions that they have, and to get shot like in a premeditated, assassination is a pretty jarring thing. So to answer your question, I think the level of sorrow, the level of despair has been much higher than I might have anticipated if you had told me a month ago that this was going to happen. And so I think it's for those reasons. He's also a young guy, 31, I think, two kids, a lovely wife at home. So you're sorrowful about that as well. Um, so there's all those things that factor in. But I think, the very sobering thing for me, I know there's been some conversation, some people on either side of the argument online about whether or not, he's a martyr. But at the end of the day, I mean, he died because he was willing to take God's word to bear in the public space. I would absolutely call him a Christian martyr. He didn't die because he was a conservative. He wasn't primarily on universities debating, taxation or road repairs. He was bringing God's word to bear on issues like the transgender movement and like abortion and like euthanasia, and for that he died. Yeah, it's a heavy week and it's a dark week. And I think it's appropriate for us to just kind of set aside what we had planned for the podcast and just kind of talk about it a little bit. We certainly want to honor Charlie Kirk. I think he did some wonderful things. I think honestly, if you think about certain individuals, I can't think of an individual more influential in the most recent uh, federal election in the US than he was. I mean, he turned several of those swing states because of the work that he had been doing with young people, getting them out to vote and helping them think through Christian and conservative ideals. There were a lot of social commentators who were saying that he was the one responsible for Trump's victory.
Yeah.
And we've talked on this podcast about many of the good things that are coming out of Trump's presidency. We definitely want to honor him for his work, and we'll talk a little bit about what I think that this assassination does for his work and ministry. But yeah, that's sort of how I've been interacting with this stuff this week, and the texts I've been getting and the posts online I've been seeing. It's heavy.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, when Trump obviously was an attempted assassination, it was not successful. But even like this one just feels different because he's not. I mean, I know so many people have already said that he's not a politician. He's not some person really of any power. I mean, he was indirectly because of his influence on social media, and really he was one of the most successful people online leveraging social media, like all the quick shorts and
Yeah,
things that from his events.
he was first past the post for a lot of that.
Yeah, like he really was pretty ahead of the curve in a lot of those things. But the thing that makes it really, I think, hit home, even for people like us, I guess, we have such a small thing that we're doing here with the people that we're reaching, but yet we say things on here that what's different,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah, totally.
that's why this is so, I think, upsetting to most people, where because it does. It is absolutely going to make people pause about whether they're gonna say that thing because some lunatic, some demon-possessed lunatic out there is just, they'll find you, right? I don't think it's that hard for somebody if they really wanted to find my address or your address, they will, right? And they wanna make an example. Now, again, who are we? Maybe you a little bit more because of your position in Ezra, and you're a little bit more outspoken on social media than I am. But that's like the crazy thing about this is that it's like,
Yeah.
oh, they just went for a pretty normal guy who just had opinions and shared them,
Yeah.
and it's uncomfortable. Like, that's like I felt uneasy this week where it's like, and I think that's the whole point of this. I think that's what they were trying to accomplish.
And I think that, I think that you're right. It's interesting. Again, I just wanna reiterate for any of our listeners, this isn't at all a humble brag. It's, who are we compared to a guy like Charlie Kirk? But I would just say, like, my wife took this, quite heavily, knowing that I've sat in universities answering questions of students. I've garnered some public attention with, what we're doing at the church and what we do through Ezra and that sort of stuff, and she's seen me in those, public settings answering hostile questions from hostile people, and so it did hit home for her, and it did add a weightiness to, what it is that normal Christians risk, in the cultural battles. We use those metaphors all the time, but when an actual bullet goes through the actual neck of an actual Christian who is standing and doing the thing that we're applauding him for, it sobers you up.
Yeah, and I think even as you say that, it's so interesting when I could watch that in a movie 100 times
Yeah.
out of 100, I'm
Oh,
not
man.
by it. I'm not bothered by it because it's like, I know it's not real, but it was something entirely different. And I mean,
Yeah.
back in the day when I think it was, like, actually post 9/11 stuff where there was a lot of those, like, beheading videos where um not ISIS, whatever it was, but the Taliban was going and doing that, and
Yeah.
me being young and stupid, sought those out and watched them, and it was just like it was just the most terrible thing. I didn't sleep for a few days just because I was like a person. And then so you even just see, yeah, like I don't know Charlie Kirk, but I am so familiar with his stuff where it's like, wait, I feel like I lost somebody that I do know, and that's just like such a weird thing about the interconnectedness of the internet and
Totally, yeah.
media where like, I felt like I knew the guy, and I feel like if I ever saw him, we probably would have had a good chat, um, and yet there he is having that happen to him. It was like it was very surreal, and that's just even like that when fiction does become reality, like, this is real, like, that's not there's no makeup, there's
Yeah.
no like, that he really died, and, like, that's a really unsettling thing to watch another human being die, like,
Yeah.
of that so publicly, and it's just like, I just feel for his wife, and I don't know if she was there or maybe behind the scenes somewhere or his kids, but if, like, to think of them maybe having had to see that or I mean, at some point in
Well,
their life, they're
and
going to.
well, and that's part of the like, these things live forever on the internet, right? And so I do think that, because these things live forever on the internet, there is gonna be that, who knows, some mean kid somewhere who puts that video, in a message to one of his kids. I mean, that sounds unthinkable, but when I saw some of the posts, I mean, Stephen King,
I know.
posted on Twitter, well, I mean, he did advocate for stoning homosexuals, so here we are.
Yep.
And it's like, there's such a callousness to the imago Dei, that it's troubling that people will go there, hours after a father of two is publicly assassinated by a mentally ill tranny. Like,
Yeah. Well,
um,
but then when you think about it though, and for the last however many years, Trump is Hitler. He is the reincarnate of Hitler. Anybody who is in any way associated with him is a Nazi. I mean, if you really I think if you were to ask most conservative people if they had a chance back in World War II and they had the bullet that could have put an end to Hitler, I think most people would say, well, they would have taken the shot. And so when you continue to tell people over and over and over again, and I think that's the power of the media in all of this, and like how like they are completely complicit in this. Like, and then when I see like yesterday, The View doing these tributes to him, it's like you don't get the right. I don't think you get the right to do that. Like you don't get to bash that man publicly and tell him he is a Nazi and then be like, "Oh, well, we can't talk about or like it should never come to violence." It's like, what do you think people are gonna do when you continually tell people that this kid is a Nazi, and well, what would most people try to like? They would entirely affirm that Nazism is bad and Hitler was bad and he should have died and anybody who could have would like should have killed him. It's like, well, of course people are going to start thinking that it's appropriate to start killing them, and that's what like so much of the reaction is, and that's what just really when I see all these people paying tributes like The View, it's like, no, like you are part of the reason why this kid felt empowered to go and put a bullet in the guy's head in his neck. And it really bothers me when I see that.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw, MSNBC's, anchor Matthew Dowd. So he's actually been fired.
Yeah.
So I'm glad actually to hear that. But, as news was coming in, we didn't even know if Charlie Kirk was dead or not. But if you'd seen the footage, I mean, the way the bullet went through that artery, it was pretty clear that that was gonna be a fatal shot, barring some sort of miracle. But Matthew Dowd on live television, described Kirk as, quote, one of the most divisive people, especially divisive younger figures who constantly was sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed his speech at certain groups. He then actually went on to say, we're not quite sure. This very well could be a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration at the event and accidentally shooting Charlie. So it was just it's interesting that you like it when you so villainize and demonize people with whom you disagree, it's amazing what will come out because you've spent so much mental and spiritual and emotional energy, you know, dehumanizing them in your minds that you suddenly have this guy get shot and you sort of blame it on him, because and even the idea that Charlie is in any way engaging in hate speech just shows the frailty of their ideology and the insecurity of their positions and the fact that they never actually listened to what Charlie said. I mean, truthfully, he was one of the most gentlemanly
Yeah.
guys, I'm not saying this in any way against a guy like Crowder, but Steven Crowder is far more, I would say, antagonistic in doing many of the same sorts of things on university campuses. And yet, Charlie Kirk, I think, oftentimes was very gentlemanly, was a very kind-hearted man. Again, not saying Steven Crowder isn't, just saying that, Charlie Kirk, of all of these kinds of personalities, I think, always exemplified kindness and gentleness. Now, and then, like the other thing that really bothered me about Matthew Dowd's perspective was that he immediately said, "Hey, this could be one of the supporters in the crowd just accidentally firing his gun off," because in his mind, he doesn't have a category for anybody on his side, the progressive left, who would have a rifle and training enough with it to shoot the guy. And that just kind of again shows the cognitive dissonance that I mean, the left isn't against guns; they're against the right having guns.
Yeah.
They're not against hate speech; they're against hate speech that's targeted towards them. They're not against blasphemy laws. They're against they're for blasphemy laws as long as they suit them. Like it's just this is the world that we live in right now, and it's frustrating. And so just to even link this back, so you mentioned the two things, and the young white Ukrainian girl who is um, murdered by the black guy on the bus who had a rap sheet longer than my arm, who
Yeah.
should have been imprisoned but wasn't. That was obviously a tragic event as well. We can talk about that a bit. But the other thing that's like, I get that these things aren't all equal, but I don't know if you saw like Phillies Karen, at the Phillies game, and I actually had a post on social media where I was kinda linking some of this stuff because I obviously I'm not gonna link her to somebody who shot Charlie Kirk, but my point is that there is this sort of package deal in the sort of what kind of a person the mainstream media creates, and
Mhm.
they do create the double vax, triple boosted, climate alarmist, anti-Trump, HR pronouns in the bio, purple hair lesbian kind of person. And I don't think that we should let this cultural moment go by without recognizing that a lot of this stuff, it's a package deal. It is a worldview that they are feeding you, and it creates the kind of um, virtue signaling in public, but privately a terribly wicked person, like we saw with the Phillies Karen, like we're seeing with this individual. I know, even in prepping for this, there was they have somebody in custody. There was as we're filming this, there's a press conference, so maybe right after we record this, we'll get a little bit more information about the actual shooter. But I do think that we can't escape this moment without recognizing that mainstream media and modern progressive left influence creates this kind of person.
Yep.
And there are degrees to it. And I would even just say, like, you asked what the reaction is. You know, it's very interesting that so many people called Charlie Kirk like an extreme right wing, extremist kind of thing. I think he was very moderate. He was some of his views would have been more democratic in the '80s than Republican, quite frankly. He's a very moderate, just conservative. And if he is villainized, I think people are going to be like, what things like this does is it actually creates the radical right that they're afraid of.
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk was not a radical right wing extremist, but you're going to see some of them if these kinds of things keep happening.
Mhm.
You know how you create a radical right wing extremist? You keep letting black guys who should be in prison go on buses and kill innocent white women.
Yep.
That's how you create an extremist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
One of the things that I'm actually very encouraged by in all of this is the fact that these people are not getting away with their very overt public displays of celebration over this.
yeah,
Um, like there was a comic book artist for DC who, or either she was the artist or the writer, I can't remember, but they canceled her entire run of books. They've fired her.
because of her public comments.
Yeah, because of her
Good.
comments. There are tons of people who are now scrambling to delete posts because they actually see that there's consequences. Because there's people who are in all over the place, and it's amazing to see the number of people who are now getting fired and companies that are coming out and saying they don't align with our companies, they're no longer here. So which is great that and I think we all need to be very thankful for Charlie because this part of this cultural moment that we're in right now, where we are seeing the tide shift more right is largely because of Charlie Kirk doing boots on the ground, going into, like, some of the most depraved places in America, which is college campuses, and challenging people, and I think it's so encouraging that his work is gonna continue, and Lord willing, it's not gonna stop, and we're gonna continue to see this shift away from everything, and we see the fact that they either whether it was an individual or a group of people who coordinated this thing, and it seems like at least they're saying that the bullets had pro-trans stuff on it, like, who knows, but
That
you have to imagine the person it is likely tied to that because, I mean, at the event, he was talking about anti-trans stuff, he's been very outspoken about that. The fact that they needed to kill him was the fact that they know that they're losing ground, right?
100%.
And that I think we all need to be encouraged by that, and honestly, you know what? As much as it is really heartbreaking to think of those kids, his children, not having him, and they're
Yep.
so young, they're probably not even gonna remember him, which really sucks, and that's actually, like, heartbreaking to think that those
Yeah,
kids
it
aren't even
is.
gonna remember him, but they'll be able to look with, like, pride thinking about their dad, and, like, he pissed them off so much, and they were so scared of him that they had to kill him.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
right? And it's like you don't off somebody because they're not a threat. And that to me is just like they have that. I'm sure they would rather their dad and his wife would rather her husband, but it's like I think like most people who lose their Christian family member or loved one to something like this, it's like there's the comfort that we have in knowing that he's good, right? Like
Yeah,
we're not worried about him. He's with his savior. Again, regardless of however you understand the eschaton and the winds and that's irrelevant. The fact that he is eternally with his Lord, and I think is just
yeah,
something that is something that our enemies, they will never be able to take that away, right?
that's
And
right.
that's where, yes, it is sad, but there is victory, and that's where, as we talk about God writing his story, and it's like, yeah, he's written the story. He's the one who's sovereign over the story, and Charlie Kirk is a character in that story, and I'm very thankful for him, and you know what? Now we can pass the baton, and hopefully my prayer is that this leads to Christians waking up and doing the exact same thing. Maybe not in the exact same way, right? Not everybody's gonna go on college campuses because he was sharp and quick in a way that most Christians just won't be able to be. Like he was a very, very sharp, intelligent guy. But now it's like, people, let's take from his example, and it's like when you're at a dinner table with friends or family, have that conversation, right? Like, don't be afraid to say the thing that you might not want to, or it's like, who cares if Aunt Karen gets mad because you say that trans is bad? Who cares? Like, let her get mad about it. Say it, and say it unapologetically. And I think I'm hoping that we see Christians take it seriously, because I think that's the only way forward. And I don't want, because I think part of the problem right now is, and I'm sure Nate, you've felt this as well, but there's that impulse that came out in me this week where it was like, okay, time to arm up and go to war. And right, like, that's just, you see this kind of thing, but it's like, okay, I don't think we need to be, there's steps that lead to that if we haven't done those other things, then just going to war is not the answer. Because it's like, well, did you pray? Right? How is your life before the Lord right now? Like, how is sin in your own heart? Are you dealing with that? Because if you go and pick up your weapon and bear arms where you're not actually in right standing with God, you're probably not gonna be doing it with the right motives and right intentions,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah.
And then it's like, so you think about that, and then you think about, well, okay, how do we prevent something like this from happening? Well, as something that, we do at the Ezra Institute, and you do as a pastor, and discipling our kids, discipling other kids, getting kids out of public school, because, like, how much of this is just the result of that kid? Who know
Being radicalized.
right? And like, I don't know the story about the kid, and I don't wanna even throw names out, because, like, you just don't, there's not enough info about who he is, or whether he really did it, or I don't know. But you almost guarantee that that kid was raised in the public school system. He was taught that he was a meaningless placebo that has no value and purpose in life, and that Charlie Kirk was nothing but something that it was inconveniencing him, so he had to get rid of him. He's been taught that he can believe whatever he wants. There is no truth, there is no justice, there is no consequences. And so, like, that's just one of those things that, like, if we're gonna actually see this change long term, it's not just about picking up a rifle. Like, we need to, yes, there may be a time where we actually have to do that. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for Christian men to bear arms to actually protect their family, loved ones, and their neighbor. But I just think right now, as I see so many guys online, and guys who I respect, pretty much saying like, "Okay, guys, it's wartime." It's just, I, I I just think there's other things there that we need to be doing as well, or before we get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, I mean, I'm not the, every time turn the other cheek, there's a context to that. I do think that, throughout history, faithful Christian men have had to bear arms and do things. Uh, Joe and I just did a podcast not that long ago about, what does resistance to tyranny look like? What does the prospect of Christians being involved in civil war look like? We've thought through these issues. We're not blushing about it. But the one of the passages that came to mind really was in Psalm 37. It starts off, fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good and dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. And the whole psalm is really about, God's ultimate plans and purposes for the world is to uproot the wicked and to allow the righteous to inherit the earth. And verse 14 stuck out to me this week where it says, the wicked draw the sword and bend their bows to bring down the poor and the needy, to slay those whose way is upright. And that's exactly what we saw this week, right? A wicked person didn't draw a bow, but pulled out a rifle and slayed someone whose way was upright. And verse 15 says, "But their sword shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken." And I just think that yes, of course, there is a time and a place to fight back, and I think we were just talking with Parker Brown last week that I think Christians who can carry in the states ought to be, and have opportunities to save men like Charlie Kirk if they can. But I don't think that the anger and the frustration and the bearing arms is ultimately the answer to this question. The ultimate answer to this question is not even just, I don't want to say thoughts and prayers. I want it to be more tangible than that. The ultimate answer to this question is the reformation of culture. These people, and we can link this with the probably, I'm making a guess here, but probably the fatherless man who took that Ukrainian girl's life on the bus. The trans activist who busted into a Christian school and shot up some kids just a couple of weeks ago. This is a battle against Christians, and ultimately it's happening because the ideological hold that they have felt as though they've had on the culture for 10 years is slipping.
Mhm.
And like a cornered animal, they are lashing out in anger and frustration. Now, I'm not saying Christians can't bear arms. They do. The state ought to. This person ought to receive the death penalty. That man who killed the Ukrainian girl ought to receive the death penalty. I'm not minimizing that at all. They ought not to be shown mercy in that way. But as everyday Christians, what we ought to do is engage in the culture war, and they slayed one Charlie Kirk, and our hope and our prayer is that 1,000 Charlie Kirks rise, and maybe whoever's listening to this is one of them.
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind when you were talking there that, um, like, for the church, one of the things that we need to see die is pietism in that, uh, "Hey, Christian," and I mean, like, I think most of our listeners are probably right there with us, but we need to encourage other Christians that your Christian life is not just about your private prayer closet with Jesus. It's like, no, there's a world out there that needs to be won, and we need to have that mindset. And I know people often get on us about we talk so much about that, post-millennial hope of that expectation of conquering all of the institutions. But like that, if you don't have that mindset, then you're just gonna continue to see this, "Oh, well, who am I to go and speak into a college campus?" Like, the church is about, the church building and being the church, and the church has the keys, so we're just to go and disciple and yes, but right when you get hand over, all these other institutions, it's like, well, our enemy is gonna use them, and they have been,
Yeah.
in
And in all honesty, if a Christian's worldview is that their greatest hope is to be raptured off this earth,
yeah,
then their response to Charlie Kirk is Maranatha,
that's right.
not your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem because there are Christians, they won't say this, they don't even cognitively actively think this, but subconsciously, their worldview would tell them this is a good thing because it means we're moving toward the eschaton, and things are going to get worse and worse. But Charlie is with the Lord, and that's the most we can hope for. And yes, that is our hope, but death is still the great enemy. And if we are giving up the battle for the culture because we're just saying Maranatha, I think we are woefully ignorant to what lesson this is supposed to teach the church.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's I really think that that mindset, that defeatism is one of those villains that we need to see die, and, you know, there's many that and there's evolution, we need to like, even
Yeah.
our kids, like, I'm teaching my kids to mock it, like, merciless. Like, I don't want if somebody says anything about evolution, I literally want my kids to laugh at them because I want that person who said it to feel so stupid that they said such a silly thing, and, like, I want my kids to not, even for a moment, think LGBT is even in any way mildly permissible. Like, I want them to be disgusted by LGBT stuff,
Yeah, totally.
right? And that's where yeah, it's just there's all these, yeah, like, there's these villains that we need to see die, and I mean, like, one of the big ones that I think people don't realize how it contributes to all these other things is just pornography, and how
Totally.
you
Yeah.
see, you see, and this is like Christian men, we're not gonna win the culture, and we're not gonna see trans ideology and LGBTQ and all these things if we still have Christian men who have perverted thoughts and perverted desires, because that perversion, yes, it's terrible. It's like, it's just stupid that you would think that it's cool to go and watch pornography by yourself and, neglect your wife, or not even prepare yourself one day if you're not married to have a wife. But it's all of the, like, the perversion of your thinking that you'll never be able to be effective for the kingdom if
Totally.
you're doing that, and then
Yeah.
all that's doing is funding this entire industry that is perverting these things. So all these trans kids, well, so much of it is because they've been, like, watching twisted pornography, and
That's
now
right.
their idea of what is good and true is
Or
entirely twisted.
or the people who abused them were
Yeah,
watching twisted pornography
exactly.
and therefore abused them, and therefore they are where they are. Like, this it really is an enemy that needs to be defeated, and it needs to be defeated in the church, and I totally agree with that. I mean, we can't decry all the LGBT stuff, from our high horses in the church when, we wouldn't let anybody look at our browser history. So I agree, and that's why, like, this isn't pietism to say, how can you, combat what just happened to Charlie Kirk? Stop watching porn.
Yeah,
And that's not a pietistic response. That's a real tangible response, because I can draw a pretty straight line from, 40 years of a culture steeped in pornography and a church steeped in pornography to what just happened. So it's just it's first things, right? You can't Adam and Eve, one of the many things they were guilty of was reaching out for the knowledge, the wisdom prior to being ready to rule.
yeah,
And so too many Christians, they wanna bear arms, and they wanna go and fight, and they wanna go be Charlie Kirk, and it's just like, your browser history is a mess, you neglect your wife, you're not a good father, you're not in the word, and so it's not pietistic to say, "Get your house in order,"
yeah,
so that you can be effective in the kingdom, because it doesn't stop there, it goes out from there.
yeah. Well, because, like, the reality is, like, if you're, a dad and you've got young kids or even teenage kids and you're watching pornography, you are absolutely not loving your wife, or sorry, loving your wife or loving your kid the way, like, your daughter. You're not loving her, giving her the affection that she actually is designed to need, because you can't. Like, you won't be able to, because your thoughts and desires are so twisted and perverted that you're not gonna be able to sit on the couch and cuddle with your 13-year-old daughter without it being like, "Oh, is this," like, having it be sexualized in some way, or having, like, training your son to train a to love a woman the way that she should, and for him to, master his own testosterone and his own emotions and his own sexual desires and all those things, if you're yourself not doing it. So because you're not doing it, you're not training your son to do it. And all of this is just, again, like, perpetuating. And then you send them to a university that, like, their sole mission at this point is to train up these kids to be communists. Like, they're not even hiding it anymore. Right. And so, yeah, we're not going to train the culture or transform the culture until, one, ourselves, and then our homes are actually transformed as
Yeah.
well.
But the other thing I would say is, like, when we're thinking through some of these incidents, now the Charlie Kirk assassination is a little different because he shot from so far away and kind of ran away. I don't know. I don't know who would have heard a gunshot and watched a hooded individual jump off a roof with a rifle who could have maybe tackled him right there. But certainly that guy on the bus, there were other passengers on the bus. There's a male in that bus who's, like, standing in the aisle a little bit down, and you look at that guy and you're like, "What a coward." I hope his picture goes viral as well. And it's like, so the other thing is, it's not just get your house in order in terms of your lust, that's part of it, but also get your house in order in terms of, like, are you the kind of man who would stop that woman from getting murdered? Are you the kind of man who can step in? Are you the kind of man who can wrestle a perpetrator to the ground if necessary? And I would just say, like, Christian men, we need to recognize our duty in culture. It's to speak out and to be able to combat lies with truth. Therefore, you must be a scholar.
Yeah.
It's to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Therefore, you must be a warrior.
Yep.
It's to stay pure in the face of a sexualized and tempting culture. Therefore, you must be pure. So it's like it's all the things that you must be in order to be the kind of man that God can use. And we just lost a good and faithful man. So if we want the blood of the martyr to be the seed of the church, then we have to pray that God raises up many more seeds. And that is men who take seriously their battle against their own laziness, their own gluttony, their own lust and their own perversion, right? Their own, intellectual laziness or apathy.
Mhm.
So I say all that because, if we want to be the kinds of men who can take up the mantle and the void that the death of Charlie Kirk leaves, we have to take our personal responsibility seriously and be self-ruled.
Yeah. There's maybe I've mentioned this before, but there's a video of the Fiji men's rugby team. You've probably seen
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, you sent it to me actually.
There was just like just animals. These guys are monsters, right? They're all big dudes. And at the beginning of the game, I'm pretty sure, and I haven't confirmed this, but I heard people say that the team they were playing was some Islamist country or something like that. And so here they were, these Christian men singing a psalm, arms locked around each other, like hugging each other, singing this psalm, praising Jesus. And it's like, but then, yes, they weren't going to actual war, but they were in a way, right? Like they were going to battle against these other guys, and just like that picture really just is really stuck in my mind where are we truly trying to be like David, who was a warrior poet and, like, is that a warrior poet king? Is that the kind of man that we're trying to be? Because I think we do need to be, to your point, like, we need to be ready, physically to protect not only ourselves, but our wives, our kids, our neighbor, right? We need to, and that does mean being prepared physically to do that, and it's like, this seems to be one of those sins that you're not allowed to touch, but it's like, gentlemen, if you're overweight and you're not able to run, I'm not going to put an amount of time or distance on it, but it's like if you can't run for a few minutes because you're winded, it's like you probably need to do something about that because if somebody, like, unfortunately, and I think thankfully the areas that you and I live, the threat of this is lower. But I mean, it's not out of the realm of possible that our kids are playing even when we're sitting on our front lawn and somebody tries to come up and take them. Like
Right.
that's not out of the realm of possible. So it's like, are you able to run? Are you able to chase somebody down who has, taken something, or, you're fighting some like obviously, Lord willing, I never have to do that, but I want to be able to be in a place where if I see somebody on the street like punching some old woman, which happens, which is crazy. Like that happened just recently. Like a little old lady was getting
Yeah.
punched by some immigrant guy not long ago, down somewhere down
Yeah.
in the States. Now somebody came in and I think stopped him, but it's like, yeah, like, are you able to even do that? And so I think that's where, like, I hope for all of us as we think about this, it's like, Lord willing, we don't actually have to do that and bear arms, but we need to be ready to if we have to, and we need to be prepared and trained and equipped for that. And but we also can't forget that, you know, we have to pray, we have to be reading our Bibles, we have to be evangelizing. It was a thing that I think you and I were just talking about, um, as we're kind of prepping for the Ezra conference here in Ingersoll in, I think November, and
November 1st.
yeah, talking about immigration. And, so many people are frustrated, and I am as well, when you just see all these people come and taking jobs away from Canadians, and it's frustrating, but so many people just say like, "Well, we need to just get rid of them." It's like, "Okay, but for whatever reason God has brought them here, like, let's not forget that God is sovereign over that. They're not here by accident." And so, like, let's maybe take advantage of the opportunity that, yeah, we've kind of failed in some ways going to those countries that are harder to reach, but God did bring them here. So let's share the gospel. Let's actually disciple them, and then let's send them back, right? Send them back to go reach their people of their culture and history, ancestry, and all those things. So let's just not forget that, yes, we're fighting against internally Christians who have abdicated the responsibility of engaging the culture. But let's not go so far as to be those extreme right wing guys who are now just looking at an opportunity to pick up their guns and go hunt, because that's not, we're never told that it is okay for us to go hunting as Christians,
That's right.
right? And so, But yeah, I don't know. It's just it's a weird day, but I mean, like, the thing that I just keep reminding myself in all of this is like, "Okay, God, you're sovereign. You, this did not happen by accident, and we don't understand how all of that works into his grand story, but we know that the ultimate villain has been defeated and will continue to be defeated, and all these other enemies will be defeated. Maybe not, likely not in our lifetime, but that's the beautiful thing about his story is he's the one who's writing it, and he's the one who's victorious over evil, and we can just rest in knowing that. And I pray that if ever in my life something comes up and I need to stand boldly the way that Charlie Kirk did, I pray that I am found faithful in that moment and, would be able to do so unashamedly.
Yeah. So, just, sort of wrap up, I know many of our listeners come to our church, not all, but providentially, it always seems that when these big cultural moments come, God has orchestrated our sermons in such a way because this isn't me at all rewriting a single thing, although I'll probably add an illustration talking about this. But we just preach chapter by chapter, verse by verse through the Bible, and we are in this coming Sunday. We are in 2 Samuel 2 through much of chapter 3 as well. And the sermon title is called Straight Lines and Crooked Sticks.
Mm,
And the big idea is that God advances his kingdom purposes through the messiness of human sin and political manipulation.
yeah,
And what we see there, right, is David rises to the throne, God's, appointed king. He rises to the throne through, the messiness of having, Joab, who's a terrible guy on the good guy's side, and Abner, who acts honorably in this particular story on the bad guy's side, and the messiness of life, and betrayal and all these kinds of things. The messiness of human sin doesn't thwart God's plans and purposes. In fact, he uses it. And that's one of the great things about our God.
yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, looking forward to hearing that, brother. And, well, listeners, I think that's all for us. Thank you for joining us. We know that I'm sure we're all, we've been hearing a lot about this. So, thanks for sticking around, and we're thankful for all of you. We pray that all of our listeners that this would embolden you to just be faithful wherever God has you, whatever it is, whatever your vocation is. That we would all be striving just to be obedient to Christ, to His Word, to His law, and let's just pray that we can see all of this lead to a transformed culture in our lifetime, but even more importantly for the lifetimes of our kids and grandkids and future generations. So we're thankful for you. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, stay nerdy.